basic sculpting. In this video you will learn the basics of sculpting, adjust your brush's type, strength and size, understand how dynamic topology works and when to use it, and then finally how to find a brush if you've accidentally deleted it. So let's hop straight on over into Blender. Right, so now we're over in Blender, the first thing I want to do is we're going to be playing with something that's quite destructive, so I don't want to work on our fluffy bunny for the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a brand new Blender file with our default cube in it, and I suggest you do the same now to play with the sculpting tools. So let's go ahead and start playing with the sculpting tools. So if we hop down to where it says object mode, we've got a series of options and we're going to click on sculpt mode. And you will see on the left hand side in the tool shelf the menu options change down here. There are different tabs going down. We're going to be focused on just the tools one here, and I'm going to pull this out so we can see a bit more of what's going on. And down at the bottom here the menus have changed ever so slightly. So what does this do? Well, we can literally start changing our cube about. Now, as you can see, I'm left clicking here and it's kind of pulling the corners of our cube out, but not really changing its shape. There's nothing awesome going on yet. Now, the reason for that is the brush tool directly affects the underlying mesh. So in this case, there are only 8 vertices, so the only thing I can move are the 8 vertices and everything else is joined to that. So if I were to add more vertices to this mesh, so if we go in and quickest way of doing this is probably just subdividing it and applying the subdivision. So I'm going to go over to our modifiers. I'm going to go down on the generate column to subdivision surface modifier. Of course it makes it kind of spherical. I'm just going to add 2 subdivisions and apply them. So now we have some more geometry to play with, and we can see that in wireframe mode as well. We can now morph our model about. Now it's not moving very much at the moment as we try and move it. I'm just clicking away and wiggling around, and there we go, it starts to move up, and every time you go over the top of one of those vertices again it moves it out slightly. And we can see here this is the type of brush we have, and we're currently adding. You can subtract, of course, which does the reverse and pushes stuff in. There we go. So let's flick that back to add for the moment. Now the first thing I'm going to deal with is this radius and strength. So the radius is the size of that brush. Now you'll notice it's in pixels. Now this is important because if you zoom in or out on your model, you see when it's all the way zoomed out here, we're affecting the entire model by doing this sculpting. If we were to zoom in, then we're only affecting one vertex, in fact, in this case, but the radius of the brush hasn't changed. So depending on the scale of your model, your radius will differ. Now the shortcut for adjusting the radius of your brush is the F key on the keyboard. And if we press F now, we can see we can make the brush bigger and smaller, and that outer red circle will show you the new size. Now you'll notice that it's faded, and it's faded because it doesn't affect the entire area equally. It affects the middle more so than the edges, and that helps with your sculpting, otherwise you'd end up with a very sharp lines. Now if that's something that you wanted, then you can control that. The strength itself is currently set to 50%, and the strength allows you to be much more gentle with your sculpting. So imagine that this was a real piece of clay in front of us. If you went for it really heavily with a tool, you would end up making more of an impression of changing it more than if you were very gentle. Ultimately, you can do the same amount of sculpting at 50%, you just have to do something twice to get the same result as if it was up at 1, or roughly speaking. However, the lower the strength, it does afford you more control when you're working on something detailed. Now, I'm going to set the size of our brush down a little, so I'm just going to press the F key and move it back down. So the strength of the brush can be changed either here in the tool shelf, or it can be changed with the Shift and F key. Now you'll notice it gets this way, it's a bit counterintuitive. The brush gets weaker, less strength, when you go towards the outer edge of the circle, the big circle here, and stronger as you move in and in. So you'll want to pick, I usually leave it around 50, but if you need to make massive changes quickly, obviously you can bump the strength up, and if you need to be more gentle and subtle with your changes, you can lower the strength and have more control. Now, we've already covered the add and subtract. They basically mean, are you pulling the model outwards or are you pushing it inwards? But at the top, we've got this picture. So we're not quite doing this in order here, but at the top, we've got a picture of a brush. And if we click on that, it gives us a selection, and these are the default selection. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 16, 18 different brush types to choose from, and they all affect our model slightly differently. Obviously, you can customize these like you can anything in Blender. That also means you can unfortunately delete something. So if I go ahead now and let's say this blob one here, select it. Now during the messing about up here, if you were to experiment with it, if you accidentally hit the F key, which removes the users from it and creates a fake user, and then click the cross for some bizarre reason, and on top of that, so it's still there at the moment, you can see it's just there, but it's got a 0 next to it. But if I now save this Blender file, so let's go ahead and save it, and brush gone test. Now if I quit from my Blender program, okay, now I've quitted from Blender, start it back up again. Need to bring it down onto the screen. Make it the right size. Okay, so and go file and open recent and go to brush contest. Now it's not there anymore. So if you hadn't realized you had done this, you'd need to get that brush back. So let's cast our eyes to the sculpting header down at the bottom, and there's a word there that says brush. Okay, and if we click on that, there are a series of options here, one of which is sculpt tool, and the one that we've deleted was called blob. So you may have to refer to an unaltered Blender file if you were to do that, but here we can go ahead and go blob. And that's added it back to our... Oh no, sorry, that's overwritten the one that was there previous, which was brush, sculpt, clay. Okay, so we need to click the plus, so we've got clay 001, and you can see that's here. And with that one selected, we can go in and go brush, sculpt tool, blob, and of course rename it here to blob. So if you wanted to modify your tools and you actually found a brush type you liked and you were working with lots, you could go ahead and create a custom type. And now you can see there are Fs all across these. That means it's got a fake user, so that when you close Blender down and open it back up again, you will see this again with materials. In fact, we covered it briefly in the materials section before. It has a 0 next to it. It means that the next time you close Blender and reopen it, it won't exist anymore. Okay, so finally, if we scroll down here, you might not have to scroll yourself, there's something here that says DIN Topo, or Dynamic Topology. Now, as we mentioned to begin with, this is actually turned off. Now, when I move this, it's moving that single vertex about. If I enable Dynamic Topology, it gives us, you can see straight away it's triangulated our mesh. It needs to do that, it can't work with quads. And if we go in here and start modeling, you see that it's adding new vertices to our model, enabling us to add a fine amount of detail to that small area. Yet if we look at the underlying mesh, in fact it's got reflection turned on as well. That's important, we'll have a look at that in a moment. So this here is adding detail where we need detail, but keeping the rest of our model plain. Now that is quite important when you're modelling, because if this area here doesn't need lots of geometry, it's pointless having lots of geometry. And if you cast your eyes up to the top, we can see this model now has nearly 1200 vertices, and if I draw some more in there, it will go down. Now why has it gone down? Because I've zoomed out slightly. In fact, if I zoom out lots, so this brush size is the entire model, and click, it's dropped everything down. So you can see that dynamic topology is very useful, but if you didn't know that actually zooming out and using it will actually lower the amount of polygons in your scene, that could be very destructive if you've just been working on some detail. You'd have to obviously go and undo it, but if you've gone past your undo buffer, you'd be pretty much stuck. Okay, so final thing now on reflection. So further down we've got symmetry, and we can see here the direction on dynamic topology here, because we've got it enabled, is -x to +x. So if we were looking front on to our model here, and this was the side, we can give it some, let's give it some ears, I suppose, if you wanted, or a nose, and we can see that we can start building out a model very quickly. And I haven't really played with this too much going on here. And we can see if we turn dynamic topology off, symmetry and symmetry lock down here is locked to the x-axis at the moment, which means that, as you can see here, along the axis it will mirror, and we can change that if we want to the y-axis, which will do this way, and the z-axis, which will do the top and the bottom. And of course that will depend on the orientation of your model. So one final thing to cover here is smoothing, the auto smooth feature. So as you're going around your model and adding, you may end up with it not being quite as smooth as you wanted. Now there is a brush here that is smoothing as well, which is this one here, looks granular and smooth, and that one itself will help smooth out details if you've made too much of a sudden change in your model. Now if we have a look back at a normal brush type, let's go back to blob, and we can see here auto smooth. If we turn that up, as you're modelling, it will help smooth out the details, so it won't be as aggressive. The other thing that you can do when you're modelling is press the shift key, and this will smooth as you're modelling. So it's no longer doing the blob, it's doing smoothing, so it can help flatten out details. So if let's go here, let's up the strength to 1 and really bring this out here. Let's turn on dynamic topology as well to make sure we get detail in there as well. So that's bringing it really far forward like that. Now if we wanted to make all this jaggedness smooth, well, we can just hold down shift as, I'm just going to make the window a bit bigger so we can see what's going on. I can hold down shift as I'm doing this just to run over these aggressive details to smooth them out. Now of course if you wanted a large amount of detail, then you may want to go back again with a smaller brush and add in that detail. Now do be careful when using the smooth, of course, because as you can see here, this lovely point that's coming out, if I just smooth it, eventually it will end up flattening it back down, because that's what it will tend towards. But smoothing your model out helps massively. And we can see here that you can see all the faces. Perhaps you don't like that. Of course, in object mode, what we haven't done here is set the shading to smooth. If we set the shading to smooth, we get a much better appreciation of how that's looking. Of course, when it's flat, we get a much better impression of the underlying geometry. Okay guys, it's challenge time. I'd like you to define your bunny's shape. So the head will want the most detail since it's a focal point for our model. Recommend making sure symmetry is turned on. It's going to make making your model much better. Now use reference material for an accurate shape, although if you do want to caricature your bunny rabbit, then please do so. Remember, this is your model, there's no right way of modelling a bunny. As long as everybody sees it as a bunny, that is great. Now do model the ears at this stage too, using whatever method you want, and add 2 UV spheres for the eyes, and keep them as a separate object for now. Now I would suggest with the ears themselves that you quickly block model a couple of ears basically, and then join them to the rest of the mesh rather than trying to use the sculpting tools to create ears. Although if you want to do that, do give it a go, have fun with it. Pause the video now, give that a go. Now because of the length of the solution for this video, the actual solution will not be in this lecture, it will be in the following lecture. So get creating your bunny, and I will see you in the next lecture.